There is a moment in every person's life that quietly changes everything. For some, it happens in childhood, when a teacher praises another student instead of them. For others, it happens after being rejected by someone they loved. Or perhaps it arrives much later, when they realize that almost every decision they've made was shaped by one invisible question. What will other people think? It seems harmless at first, almost responsible. After all, everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to belong. Everyone wants to feel seen. But hidden inside that simple desire is one of the most dangerous traps a human being can ever fall into. Because the moment your happiness depends on someone else's approval, your freedom quietly disappears. Not overnight, not dramatically. It fades, one decision at a time. Most people never notice it happening. They believe they're simply being polite, being kind, being considerate. But beneath those good intentions, another force is quietly taking control. The fear of rejection. Think about the last time you wanted to say something, but stayed silent. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you were afraid of how people might react. Maybe you swallowed your opinion during a meeting. Maybe you laughed at a joke you didn't find funny. Maybe you agreed with someone even though every part of you wanted to disagree. Those moments
You begin living a version of yourself that earns the least resistance. You become easier to like, but much harder to recognize. The strange part is, people rarely notice the transformation because it happens so gradually. One compromise becomes another. One silence becomes another. One apology becomes another. Until one day, you wake up feeling exhausted. Not because you've worked too hard, but because pretending to be someone you're not is one of the most exhausting jobs in the world. The truth is, most people are not tired because life is difficult. They're tired because they're carrying identities that were never truly theirs. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every single day. At first, it feels uncomfortable. After a while, you get used to it. Months pass. Years pass. Eventually, you forget you're carrying it at all. That is exactly what happens with the need for approval. It becomes so familiar that it begins to feel like your personality. You start believing, this is just who I am. But it isn't. It never was. You weren't born afraid of disappointing people. You learned it. As children, we quickly discover that approval brings rewards. Good grades earn praise. Obedience earns affection. Following the rules earns acceptance. Our brains connect approval with safety. And in childhood, that lesson makes sense. Children depend on adults to survive. But many people unknowingly carry that same survival strategy into adulthood. Only now, instead of seeking approval from parents, they seek it from coworkers, friends, partners, strangers on the internet, people who barely know their name. Suddenly, a compliment can make them feel valuable. A criticism can ruin an entire week. A social media post that receives fewer likes than expected becomes a reason to question their worth. Without realizing it, they've handed complete control of their emotional state to people who aren't even thinking about them. And perhaps that is the greatest irony. The people whose opinions control your life are often too busy worrying about their own lives to notice yours. Yet we continue performing. We edit our personalities. We soften our opinions. We hide our ambitions. We pretend to enjoy things we secretly dislike. Not because we are dishonest, but because we fear isolation more than we value authenticity. This fear has shaped entire lives. People stay in careers they hate because leaving might disappoint their families. They remain in unhealthy relationships because being alone feels more frightening than being unhappy.
It begins the moment you stop asking, "How can I make everyone accept me?" and start asking, "What kind of person do I want to become?" Those are two completely different lives. One is built from the outside in. The other is built from the inside out. One depends on applause. The other depends on purpose. One changes with every opinion. The other remains steady through criticism. Most people never discover this difference. They spend decades trying to become more impressive without ever becoming more authentic. They collect achievements, titles, money, recognition. Yet every accomplishment creates only temporary satisfaction because external validation can never permanently fill an internal emptiness. It's like pouring water into a bucket with holes. For a moment, it feels full. Soon after, it feels empty again. So you chase another promotion.
Imagine for a moment that someone handed you the remote control to your own emotions. Every button represented a different feeling. Joy, confidence, peace, anger, fear. Now imagine giving that remote to a complete stranger. At first, it sounds ridiculous. Why would anyone willingly allow another person to decide whether they feel happy or miserable? And yet, millions of people do exactly that every single day. Not with a physical remote, but with their desperate need to be approved. The moment another person's opinion determines your emotional state, they gain a level of influence over your life that they never earned. That is how control begins. Not with chains, not with threats, but with dependence. Because dependence creates predictability. Everyone, except yourself. And here's the tragedy. The more you sacrifice yourself to keep everyone happy, the less people appreciate the sacrifice. At first, your kindness is admired. People call you dependable, reliable, generous, easy to talk to. But over time, something changes. What was once appreciated becomes expected. The favors become obligations. The extra effort becomes the minimum. The late-night phone calls, the endless explanations, the constant availability stop feeling special. They become normal. And once something becomes normal, people stop valuing it. Human nature rarely treasures what is always available. Think about the air you breathe. You almost never notice it. Not because it lacks value, but because it never seems scarce. Now imagine trying to hold your breath. Within seconds, the very thing you ignored becomes the only thing that matters. Your attention works the same way.
Your presence works the same way. The more freely you give them away, the less valuable they appear. This doesn't mean you should become cold or selfish or emotionally distant. It means you must understand the difference between kindness and self-abandonment. Kindness says, "I choose to help." Self-abandonment says, I have to help or they won't like me. Those two sentences may sound similar, but they are separated by an entire world. One is freedom, the other is fear. The people around you can feel that difference, even if they never speak about it. Confidence doesn't announce itself, it radiates. Neediness doesn't announce itself either, it radiates too. People may not consciously understand why they treat two individuals differently, but they sense the invisible energy behind every interaction. One person enters a room trying to prove their worth. The other enters knowing they already possess it. One seeks permission, the other seeks purpose. And without a single word, the room responds differently. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely comfortable with who they were? They weren't louder, they weren't richer, they weren't trying to dominate anyone. Yet somehow, people naturally respected them. Why? Because they weren't asking
It doesn't only change your life. It changes everyone's access to you. Some people celebrate that change, others resist it. Not because they hate you, but because your transformation forces them to adjust. And adjustment is uncomfortable. This is why becoming stronger often feels lonely before it feels liberating. The people who only knew the version of you that always agreed may not recognize the version who finally speaks with conviction. The people who expected unlimited access to your time may become frustrated when you begin protecting it. That's okay. Not every relationship is meant to survive your evolution. Some relationships were built around the person you used to be, not the person you're becoming. And perhaps that is the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the price of becoming yourself is disappointing people who only loved the version of you that required nothing from them. But ask yourself this: would you rather disappoint someone else or spend the rest of your life disappointing yourself? Because one pain lasts for a moment, the other lasts for a lifetime. The day you stop needing permission to exist, something extraordinary happens. Criticism loses its power. Rejection loses its sting. Silence stops feeling lonely. You no longer chase acceptance. You choose alignment. You no longer ask, how do I make everyone like me? You ask, am I becoming someone I can respect? And that single question has the power to change everything.